Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion about the Wood Elves in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. Out of the races of Warhammer 3, the Wood Elves are a very strong race with an amazing unit roster. If we look at that unit roster, you can see that you have some really good infantry options. Maybe not the most durable infantry options, but certainly things like Blade Singers. They will do a heck of a job in an actual melee fight. And you do have more durable options. In fact, you have some of the most durable infantry options in the game, or rather monstrous infantry options with regards to Treekin. See, Treekin, regular Treekin, I'm not talking about malevolent ones, regular Treekin have a pretty good level of armor, they have a good amount of physical resistance, and you can buff them even further. Because ancient treemen have the skin of the woods. So suddenly your treekin, which again are already very durable units by default, become ridiculously more powerful. You do have flying units, you do have some of the best range units in the game. You are lacking in artillery, but that's where allied recruitment can come in, that's where other things can come in. Heck, if you're playing Durfu, you can even outright get Wallbreaker if that's really in your interest. But you're not really going to struggle with regards to siege battles. But what is the problem in a Wood Elf campaign? Or what are the problems that the Wood Elves have to deal with? Well, a couple of things. First off, they are limited in, flat out limited, in how much they can actually get on a campaign map. In terms of territory, that's actually useful. So that means hero capacity, that means how many armies they can maintain is inherently limited in campaign. This is not necessarily a problem because it does work for Wood Elves, but it does contribute to some the bigger issue that Wood Elves have. They are freaking boring because when you have fewer armies, when you have fewer heroes, a faction just doesn't have the same kind of flexibility as another one. Now, to be certain, there are a decent number of forests on the campaign map that you can take advantage of, but they are limited. So you look at 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 major forests, and mind you, the Oak of Ages doesn't count like that. It doesn't count like one of those. So realistically, there's like 12 forests that you can use for the sake of hero recruitment. That means you can get up to 13 heroes. It might sound like a really good number, it is, but if you're looking to play a really long campaign, it can be a problem. Although Wood Elves, funnily enough, are kind of designed around the idea of long campaigns. The real issue is that your economy also ends up being fairly limited as well, because your economy is based on you having control of those trees. Without those trees, all you can rely on is sacking, looting, raising settlements. In fact, Wood Elves have a really good amount of income they can gain from raising settlements. But it's kind of frustrating dealing with building up your economy in a Wood Elf campaign because every single tier of an economic building costs population surplus. It's not the case as you might see in other races where, you know, the first tier of a building requires population surplus. That would be far more reasonable. No, it's every tier of a settlement that requires population surplus. Imagine if Black Arcs required population surplus for every single building. You kind of start to understand it. It's also worse because one of the heroes that you want, your magical users or spell singers, they also come from a building that costs population surplus to get and to upgrade. Now, thankfully, you don't need to upgrade this building beyond the first tier, so at tier 2, once you have a settlement to tier 2. And you do get the advantage of being able to construct main settlement buildings without needing surplus points, so you can get a lot of building slots for a variety of unit recruitment. But then there's the problem that some of the really fun units, or really powerful units anyway, so for instance, Glegar with Starfire Shafts, or Deepwood Scouts with Swift Shiver Shafts, all that, they also require a population surplus building. Or Blade Singers themselves, they require a specific building for that in order to be able to recruit them. So you end up with fewer armies, fewer heroes than most other races, or pretty much every other race in the game. You do and a hard cap on how many heroes you can actually get in a Wood Elf campaign. And while you do have some really great units, each army is a legion in its own right, to be certain. you do feel the annoyance of having fewer armies, especially early on, because you gotta understand, when your entire economy is based on sacking, looting settlements, but your armies can end up being expensive, and your initial income of sacking and looting settlements is limited, you actually end up with very few armies. And of all the races that suffer from this, actually Wood Elves are one of the bigger problems, because Wood Elves may actually have a lot of things they could theoretically do every single turn on the campaign map if they actually had the armies to use them. Because the problem is you have to spread your thin forces around dealing with vast swaths of territory if you want to get anything done. And you reach a point where even maintaining, like right here I'm maintaining 4 armies. You might say, oh, that's reasonable. But it's really 3 armies that I'm maintaining. And yes, I'm doing some global recruitment over here for a ritual. But beyond the limited armies, it's also the fact that a lot of your forces are actually going to be sitting there doing nothing for good swaths of time because you got rituals to do at these trees, or you got events coming up with regards to these trees that force you to adopt a more defensive posture just to hurry up and wait to do something. It is annoying because, again, you have limited armies. And then on top of that, you also have systems in place that force you to keep those limited armies standing still. And it ends up this kind of frustrating dynamic where you could afford more armies if you could go out there far afield, but you really can't. And another thing to also mention about this is that Wood Elves do have the ability of teleporting around the campaign map with the Deep Roots. But that requires you to be in the region with an actual tree. So while you might think, oh, the whole world is available to the Wood Elves, in reality, there's only so much territory you actually want to cover with any army because of the various limitations. You gotta protect your trees, and it's not the case that Wood Elves don't have really powerful garrisons. They do, but again, limitations, limited recruitment slots as well. You got to be careful on how you actually use those few armies, because replacing them is not going to be a freaking fast thing to do. Like, by default, it's just like 2 recruitment slots. You can get a bunch of global recruitment benefits and all that, but yes, you do have severe limitations with regards to recruitment, with regards to your economy, with regards to your armies. Now, this is kind of the worst dynamic as far as I see it in terms of armies, because individually your armies are very strong. And if we could use them, because this is what makes Khorne great. Khorne has really powerful armies, sure. Are the Wood Elves weaker? Not necessarily so. I mean, it's a difference, right? Would I say Khorne would beat Wood Elves? Depends on the army setup, but like, let me just put it like this. A tier 1 army of Wood Elf Glade Guards would walk around in circles around the full army of Bloodletters or Cast Warriors, and that's just tier 1. Don't get me started what happens on higher tier 4 Wood Elves versus Khorne. But the thing about Khorne is that Khorne is in a constant pace of a campaign where you're going out and doing something every single turn. Now, some will argue that Wood Elves should be more defense-oriented, but defense-oriented doesn't work when your defense is like something happens every couple of turns, or occasionally the AI will send an army every like 6 turns into your settlement. Playing the intern bud simulator is not a fun mechanic. Plain and simple. Sure, there's some interesting things that are happening over here, like Belagar, for instance, marching right here in this territory. But I'm literally running out of money over here in this campaign. I can make it work. There are various ways around that diplomacy, but it's when you're forced to abuse diplomacy to make your entire freaking campaign dynamic work, again, that is not a great situation. It's also absurdly broken the way you engage in diplomacy, because you're so safe in your trees, because those trees, like, the thing about Wood Elf settlements is they have some of the best defensive layout, or the best defensive layout of any settlement in the entire game. That is not me trying to exaggerate on anything. That is me literally stating a fact. Because most sieges, this is the ridiculous aspect of actual siege battles, most siege maps are not actually great for the defenders. Like, there's a handful of them, but even then, it's at best even situation. When you're attacking a Wood Elf settlement, minor, major, it is a heck of a battle. The layout, the firing lanes that the Wood Elves have, the pathing of Wood Elf settlements, And it is an open battlefield. There's no walls. You can build barricades, sure, but there's no, like, walls or anything like that. And yet they're the hardest battles to actually win. Like, I don't fear any siege in the game, but when I'm attacking a Wood Elf tree, unless I cannot resolve it, I know I am very liable to take significant casualties. If there's any actual real army that could contest my own. Like, fighting against Wood Elves one-on-one in their settlements, or even 2v1, is a heck of a nightmare. And that's in the hands of the player. So when the AI attacks you, you can slaughter them with relative ease, considering things. And that's, again, not even considering building up a garrison building to a very high level, which you can. I mean, if you want to play the ultimate stand still and play the intern button simulator, that's available to the Wood Elves, to be sure, but it just is dull. And beyond all of this, you have those rituals with the Wood Elves. So your goal in a Wood Elf campaign to win it is to do a number of these rituals, and yes, takes elements, etc. You do get some hero capacity, hero rank. But your goal is to do the ritual rebirth on the Oak of Ages. That requires you to heal the Oak, which requires you, really, you could just wait an age to get it done, but realistically with the Oak of Ages, you gotta heal the various forests around the map. It does give you some very tangible benefits, like cooldown for deep roots, diplomatic relations with Bretonia, upkeep for all armies, growth to all provinces. So the benefits are there. That by the time you unlock those benefits, your game is pretty much over. That's just how CA rolls with a lot of these things, unfortunately. But the problem with these rituals is the way they're designed is like, you take territory around a forest. You can raise a settlement and occupy. You do gain some benefits early on if you do raise a settlement, but you're really much better off in the long term occupying a location. It's gonna take a good amount of turns anyway to heal a forest. Like over here, it's turn 26. This ritual is almost over. It takes 8 turns, so it's like 20 turns or so to start healing the forest. Well, yeah, roughly 20 turns. Now, in theory, with the deep roots and with the various trees and the rewards of the trees, you should have a good amount of variety, right, in your campaign. Wrong. See, in every single Wood Elfen campaign, doesn't matter who you're talking about, doesn't matter if it's Sisters, Durfu, Orion, or Draika, who literally doesn't start with the Oak of Ages, so that's one of her first goals, taking over from Orion. The problem you have in every single Wood Elfen campaign is that you supposedly have a variety of choices with regards to these forests, right, that you can take. It is a false choice. It is a false choice because many of these benefits are not really that great, except for one, in Cafe. So you want to teleport to Cafe as quickly as possible, and then fight a single battle against Cafe faction, and then you confederate this one faction, which, by the way, they start with 2 Ancient Treemen, with 2 Malevolent Treemen, 3 Malevolent Dryads, 3 Malevolent Treekin. That is an insanely good army that you can get on your hands very, very easily. But on top of that, beyond just the army that you'd get from confederating these guys very, very easily, is also the fact that you get the Bamboo Groove. And this gives you a minus 30% upkeep for Forest Spirit units, which is crazy good. Because, as I said, money can be a limiting factor, and especially for Forest Spirit units, these things can be a bit expensive. Well, Treekin certainly can be expensive, unless you're playing Orion. But even if you're playing Orion, you still want that. There's nothing that compares, that's even remotely close. The only one that I would bother with otherwise is like the Noblar Outpost that Gore starts with. And the reason is that gives you 600 income and diplomatic relations and allegiance points to the Ogre, so you can rely on Ogre mercenaries to spice things up in your army a bit more. Though in this case, I actually had to fight Greases and then get the peace agreement with him. So you end up with a do-nothing campaign for a long time. When you do fight a battle, it's really powerful, maybe a bit too powerful, but then you gotta consider Wood Elves are really good at ambushing. Wood Elves have very strong defensive settlements, so even the fun you might have in battles is taken away because when you're just trivializing every encounter, and you don't have a reason to go out there and deal with the more interesting encounters, then that doesn't create a great campaign experience. Like, this is the difference between, say, Khorne and Wood Elves, because Khorne also has limited armies. At least early on, or when it matters in a campaign. Sure, but Khorne is heavily incentivized with all the free legendary lords to actually go out there and pick very interesting fights. So you actually get to utilize their really powerful army that you're building with the legendary lord, and that is fun. Whereas with Elves, they have really powerful freaking armies, but honestly, you could get away with playing your entire campaign with Glade Guard in every single Wood Elven campaign, and that is not even an exaggeration. The only things that might challenge you are a couple of the rogue armies that spawn, but they spawn too slowly, and you're not even reactive. Like, you're not even really playing a proper defense, because you're in full control of a lot of these things. Like, when you start Ritual, you know the AI is going to attack you. So you know you need to have an army prepared. And you can intercept a lot of those armies. So you're not really playing in a reactive way. You're playing in this full control mode where you get to set the pace that you want. Now, this could be great in a slower paced game than Warhammer 3 is. Like, Wood Elves, when they were reworked in Warhammer 2, fantastic situation. Now in Warhammer 3, it's just faster pacing, and you actually end up being limited in diplomacy because you can only take tier 1 settlements outside of the forests. What kind of solutions exist for this? I think having a faster way of growing forests and all that would be great. I think that not having an insanely long construction time for forests would be also great, because it just takes a good amount of turns to get these forests to a higher level. I think not having every single tier of an economic building tied to surplus points would also be a really good thing, and something to spend those extra surplus points on other than just constructing more buildings, right? Like, remove the higher surplus points requirement, just require us to get like two surplus points for each building, free at most. And then if we get surplus points later down the line, we can spend it on other things. Again, there's really good stuff with Wood Elves, like Research Tree, there's some awesome stuff, but you almost never use a lot of these things, unfortunately. Also, it's pretty broken, and you get Wisdom with the Eagle Lords, you get Vision with all the Forest, and then you declare war on factions across the world without a care in the freaking world. In fact, it's really beneficial if you do declare, because it might spice things up in a more interesting way. That's all I had to say. Christine signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications. Stay tuned for more.